Hello, everyone. This is Claudiu Murgan, the host of the Spiritual Inspire Show. And my guest today is an amazing person, is Dr. Ian Prattis. Dr. Ian Prattis is Professor Emeritus at Carleton University in Ottawa, Canada. He's an award-winning author of 18 books. He received the 2011 Ottawa Earth Day Environment Award, and in 2018, the Yellow Lotus Award from the Vesak Project for spiritual guidance and teaching dharma. He's a poet, global traveler, founder of Friends for Peace, guru in India, Zen teacher, and spiritual warrior for planetary care, peace, and social justice. Wow. He studied Tibetan Buddhism in the early 1980s, Christian meditation with the Benedictines, and was trained by Native American medicine people and shamans in their healing practices. He also studied the Vedic tradition of Siddha Samadhi Yoga and taught this tradition of meditation in India 1996-1997. He has traveled widely on this beautiful planet and gives talks and retreats in Canada, India, Europe, the USA, and South America. The basic commitment he holds is to make the world a beautiful place by encouraging people to embrace their true nature. His teachings focuses on the spiritual issues of the day and honors all traditions. He lives in Ottawa, Canada, and supports people and communities to take care of Mother Nature and Mother Earth. Dr. Prattis, thank you for joining me today.
It's an honor, thank you.
And it's an honor for me too. I mean, to be honest with you, I've never met a person who encompasses all these three, spiritual approaches. Is quite unique. And my first question will be, which one came first into your life?
Well, during my career as an anthropologist, I was very fortunate to encounter many First Nations storytellers across North America. Dene, Hopi, Ojibwa, Algonquin, and Inuit, just to mention a few. And what struck me was that their poetic recounting of myths and history had a deep impact on how I thought and wrote. It was as though they were writing me. And I would say that without poetry, cultures implode. There were extraordinary indigenous medicine people and shamans who enhanced my process of remembering the power of the poetic voice. So I learned how to reconfigure my understanding of time, place, and consciousness. And I chose to listen to the sacred feminine voice of earth wisdom. And I first met White Eagle Woman, who was a shaman and my mentor. I met her at a gathering of elders in 1978, and her ancestors had instructed her to train me. And that ushered in a 30-year period of training. And she also ensured that I had trained with other shamans in journeying. So I would eventually create a form acceptable to non-Indigenous people. Now, the Zen piece was to learn from formidable Buddhist masters like Thich Nhat Hanh, Bhante Kovida, to name a few. And I created a YouTube channel for the Dharma talks that I later gave. And these, much to my surprise, these are still being used widely to this day. And during that learning, I was invited to go to India for guru training by Rishi Pavaka, after meeting him with several times in Canada. And he seemed to recognize something I certainly did not. And I was ordained in India as a guru in 1997. So that's the three traditions that impacted me quite a lot.
And I know I have some of your books, and the one who really impressed me was the, Trailing Six Feathers and the story, your shamanic story in a different life in 18th century. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and how that influenced you, because you're living in Canada, so that's, different, more closer to your heart, I assume.
Yes. This came about a series of a lot of surprises for me. Several decades ago, I became aware that I had a stalker, and I would glance over my shoulder, then feel a distinct presence that persisted in following me. And White Eagle Woman, my shaman mentor, made it clear that I was mistaken. This was no stalker. It was a woman from the 18th century, a medicine woman from the American Southwest, and she was trying to bring powerful medicine gifts to me in the 21st century. And I learned that she had a name, Training Sky Six Feathers. I didn't know much else about her. Now, how did it come about? Now, when I was a young professor at Carleton University, I split my time between Ottawa, Canada, and the Hebrides in Scotland. I was trying to create an academic career and at the same time save a failing marriage. And I wasn't doing a very good job with either. I had a boat in the Hebrides, a 26-foot clinker-built vessel, to enter the dangerous surrounding sea with tourists on board. On my return to Canada, after a series of brutal sea voyages, that was the time I first met White Eagle Woman. She looked into me very deeply and she saw that I needed help. And she'd been instructed by her ancestors to train me. And it began straight away with an 8-day vision quest. And she identified Training Sky Six Feathers for me and revealed the guardian role that this person had for me. And it was more than that, because what was also washed into my mind was that when I died in her arms in 1777, Training Sky vowed to find me in the future, and she refused to give up on how dense I was in present time. I was an idiot. However, through her insistent guidance, my karma was reversed. The internal battles ceased, and I learned to navigate past and present life experiences over 4 centuries. And the medicine gifts required that I nurture my skill. This is just affirming her guardian presence. And she responded after a long pause, and she said, I had to keep you alive. Your son too, for he receives the torch after your passing. I kept you alive when you almost lost your right arm in a foolish fight in Vancouver. That shows you that I was a badass at one time. I also kept you alive when you were dying in India. Now, flashing through my mind were all the moments when death had faced me in this lifetime. And I suddenly realized that she was always there when my life was at risk. And she brought me through to safety. I took our dialogue to another level. I said, when I die, will you be there? What will happen to you? And her voice was very soft and precise. And she said, when you die, I will be the last portion of your consciousness to dissolve. Before that moment of dissolution, I will guide both of us as one integrated mind into the next adventure. Now, all this is to say that this being constitutes all that is crystal clear and wise within me. And if I had not got to know her, I wouldn't be the person I am now. She was the ultimate muse, and something I really, really felt drawn to and knew that this was true. So after talking to her about death and things like that, I stayed very quiet until it was late in the night. And I knew she was listening in to my thoughts. And just before midnight, she quietly said to me, and I wrote it down. This is what she said. You have transformed all that you brought in with you and suffered from in this life. The person who stumbled blindly through the first part of your life is not the Ian walking through the second part of life. In India, Arizona, France, the Canadian wilderness, and around the world, you went to extraordinary lengths to deal with karma. You changed course and now have freedom and alignment. There were so many severe experiences, but you responded by moving in a spiritual direction. You touched universal threads that allowed me to keep my promise from 1777, and we are both grateful for that. And I could feel her smile expand along with mine, and I placed my two hands together like this with great reverence. And I gave a deep bow of gratitude to trailing sky. All I said was namaste.
So would you say that the shamanic experience was the most important one in your life, which really impacted you and the remaining of your life?
Well, that was pretty immense. And I learned so much, but I must be straightforward that I learned so much from all the different spiritual traditions that I had the good fortune to encounter. And I would have to say that I merged their depth into a deeper understanding of consciousness and spirituality. Now, on a daily basis, I followed White Eagle Woman's instructions. I would come to a stop. Usually when I would wake up in the morning, I'd look deeply and dialogue with the feminine seeds of knowledge in my consciousness. Now, this became my fieldwork of life, if you like, consciousness through the eyes of the internal feminine. I was also taught to create a mental medicine wheel in my mind to better communicate. Now, this baseline of training from the indigenous realm was taken into Zen Buddhism and Guru training in India. And I would say that I merged their depths into a deeper understanding of consciousness with clarity. So they were overlapping skillful instruments to understand life ways and healing. No one was better than any other. They meshed beautifully in my mind.
So the feminine presence or the feminine concept is not so much presence in various religions or spiritual practices. Do you think that we should bring that feminine aspect forward and rely more on the feminine wisdom?
I think so. I think this is where the indigenous learning is really so important. They start off with the notion of Mother Earth, and if we want to do anything constructive for Mother Earth, we have to tune into the feminine consciousness. And if you think in our present nations around the world, the best countries are the ones that have prime ministers who are women. I'm thinking of the Prime Minister of New Zealand,
Yes.
Jacinda, who is just so incredible. And she is bringing things to a particular level of knowing about the feminine consciousness. And, New Zealand, they're a tough bunch of people, but they are supporting the manner in which Jacinda is being their prime minister. She could be there for life, because she's just an incredible woman. But she knows what she's coming from and going to. I'm very, very impressed by her.
And she'll be even wiser if she will tap into the Maori knowledge, the natives of the land.
Absolutely.
That
Yes.
would be amazing. Something which we don't do here in Canada as much as we should, and it's quite sad. At least this is my point of view.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree with that.
Behind you is a drawing of a wolf. Is that the one who you brought from British Columbia and saved you?
Basically, yes. Hey, he's right behind me.
It's a beautiful animal, yes.
Just beautiful.
What can you share with us from your experience in India?
Okay. In India, I was studying the Vedic tradition. And this is drawn from the teachings of Ramana Maharshi, which is a wisdom tradition totally relevant to the modern day of climate crisis and COVID-19. Now, back in November 1996, I became seriously ill in India. And as I observed my bodily systems crashing one by one, I knew there was a distinct possibility of death. And to this day, I'm still amazed by how calm I was and how there's just a lack of fear. I remember a familiar voice, and it went like this: "We're so happy, Ian, that you have decided to die with us in India, and we will be most happy should you live." I was huddled on a bed in an ashram in Mumbai, India, and I opened my eyes to see one of my mentors, a Swami, sitting beside me. He sat me up and made tea with herbs, and the ashram I was in was reserved for saints and holy men, though I did not qualify for any of these categories. Now, lying close to death at that time, the lack of fear provided a sense of freedom and strength. I felt really peaceful, not a maverick standing alone. I felt very calm about letting go of my bodily existence. And the good news is that I also recovered. So in India, my preparation became a daily practice of being aware of universal consciousness, totally prepared to merge with my pitifully weak and not so awakened mind. My leap of faith was that there was understandings about death and dying in my mind. Now, this meant to me that I could use my mind to take steps to prepare for that final moment of merging with the wisdom mind of the universe, perhaps do this while I was alive. Perhaps the alive bit is the whole point. Now, the major mantra that I've trained with in India was the Gayatri mantra. And this is considered by Indian sages to be the most powerful mantra of purification and transformation. It expands consciousness in multiple directions. That's the job of the Gayatri mantra. And I took part in 2 28-day training periods, 6 months apart. These were the high points that the rest of my training built up to. My cultural and religious background was not the same as my 2 cohorts, but they were always very, very kind. They made it sure that I stayed up with them and didn't fall behind. Now, the Gayatri ceremony, and I still remember this vividly, it was conducted at sunrise and sunset every day. And the mantra was the central component of a long Sanskrit chant that prepared each one of us to experience the full effects of Gayatri. Now, prior to these training retreats, I had months of preparation, attention to meditations, dietary regime, and sexual abstinence. And I learned how to chant the Gayatri mantra and coordinate it with the 4 components of breath: inhalation, holding the air inside; exhalation, holding the emptiness. Now, the sunset ceremony was always conducted in running water to deepen the silence, the stillness, and the penetration. So the chanting of the Gayatri took place with me and my cohort standing up to our waists in the water. Now, when it came to the point of suspending thought and allowing the Gayatri mantra to arise spontaneously without consciously doing it, to my total astonishment, it did just that. At the same time, I could feel and identify the particles of mud between my toes, see minute electrons in the air, and look down on my wisdom companions from a great height. I've never taken LSD, but it must have been something like that. And I felt encompassed by the evening sky, and at the same time, I encompassed the sunset, the evening sky, and everything beyond it. And this experience was repeated with varying intensity during every sunset rendition of the Gayatri mantra, for me anyway. And I never felt it was necessary to communicate this to anybody, and not to the Swami, though he knew exactly what had happened. I went into a total silence during the last few weeks, and I do not recall talking to anyone. And I noticed that everybody very carefully left me in the silence. No jokes, nothing, just silence. Now, when I reflect back on that, is that once my wild mind was reined, and I have to tell you, it was pretty wild. Once it was reined in, clarity and compassion was suddenly there in greater compass. And this provided the basis for how I would be with the planet and others in a new way. And this partial account of my journey in India is to demonstrate that my activism for peace, planetary care, and social justice now came from a different place as a result of the internal work. It also propels me to serve the planet and humanity in a way of creating the bridges and pathways of harmony that make sense. That my work is still ongoing, but it's anchored by my journeys in India.
Yeah, I know India is a beautiful place, and question, I know that long periods of silence usually turn other parts of our brain, like telepathy. Did you encounter anything like that while in India?
Yes.
It's interesting because I read something recently about the Bushmen of Australia. This is pretty much how they talk, but they are way off from the beaten path. They are by themselves in the wilderness, and it's one way to communicate. So do you think that the term or the concept of enlightenment is similar in all religions and all spiritual approaches, or it could be different for each of them?
The novel, it was the first book I wrote way back in 1975. It's an allegory for the difficulties that I experienced. Despite my desperate state of mind at that time, this novel about awakening emerged. It was also almost like it was writing me. The book is set in the Hebrides, islands off the northwest coast of Scotland, the startling cycles of maturing and downfall of the epic character, a person called Callum Moore. He was a gifted child, a master mariner, a derelict drunk, who eventually gains wisdom from a hard life's journey. Now, he enters the dark zone of alcoholism and withdraws from society, with only his animals keeping him this side of sanity. But he survives in a bleak solitude. There's a lot of grim humor, and the novel has nature's harsh and beautiful rhapsody as the background for tragic human failings. But the failings are topped by the triumph of the human spirit. Slowly, the main character, Callum Moore, he steps away from self-destruction to an astonishing awareness that triumphs over his tragedies. And the final drama illustrates the resilience of the human spirit. Now, this whole book, it still astonishes me. It reads like an extended prose poem, reflecting all the primal forces. Now, I say this as a basis of all the three religious practices that I know. I don't compare enlightenment with distinct practices. It's either there or not. And I see no use in placing one practice higher than any other. All of these different stabs at awakening, they're equal.
Yes, yeah, I agree. Yeah,
I don't try and put one over another and say that one is best. I say, okay, if this is what works for you when I'm talking to different people, that's wonderful, and I support you totally.
and
so I don't compare enlightenment with different practices.
that's nice. Usually I hear people saying that if you're a Christian, you cannot be a Hindu, or you cannot practice shamanism or any other religion. You really have to stuck to one. But here you are an amazing example of practicing all three of them, becoming whole through each of them in a different way. What would you say to that statement?
Perhaps I can answer that with another story.
Please.
And this is a story about the Buddha and one of his most famous teachings. And this particular teaching is the 4 Brahma Viharas. This is a Buddhist insight practice. Now, he met a Brahmin gentleman who was a Hindu. And this gentleman asked the Buddha, how could he be with his ultimate God? And the Buddha gave him a practice that fully leads to awakening. And this is the first time he gave this teaching. The 4 Brahma Viharas, Brahma means, this was for the Brahma gentleman, the Hindu, and Vihara means resting with. There's 4 insight concentrations. The first one is metta, loving kindness. The second one is karuna, that's compassion. The third one is mudita, that's appreciative joy. And the fourth one is upeksha, equanimity. And the Buddha went to great length the practices and meditations to do with these 4 steps. Now, the Buddha gave this teaching not to a Buddhist, but to give a Hindu Brahmin the practices and steps into awakening. Now, from this, I would take the position that the Buddha wasn't concerned whether it was a Hindu, Buddhist, or a shaman that he was giving this teaching to. And perhaps closed-minded Buddhists should have paid attention to the 4 Brahma Viharas. Beware of just who first received it. It was not a Buddhist, it was a Hindu. And that was okay with the Buddha. He wasn't concerned about picking out, okay, is this one of my followers? If he's not one of my followers, I can't speak to him. No. There's an openness. And that's why I love the Dalai Lama so open. He is so open. I've had the good fortune to meet him when he's been visiting Canada. And he is just he's just a joyful, wonderful human being who can engage with anybody, and I'm very proud of what he does.
Yeah, so in other words, each of us has to keep an open mind and embrace whatever the calling is. Just pay attention to the signs and go in that direction, surrender to that direction until we get, fulfilled with whatever spiritual message we're supposed to receive.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
You write a lot about, environment, ecofiction. Most of your books are based on that subject. Do you think we can really understand nature if we don't become sensitive as on the spiritual side and open? We are talking about openness. Open ourselves to the spiritual side of ourselves.
To answer that, I have to go on a bit of a journey. Let me start with the latest one, because this is all about the Earth Mother. My latest book, Shattered Earth, Approaching Extinction, that's my 18th book. And it was the most difficult one to write, because it's about our broken world, particularly with respect to the impending extinction brought about by climate emergency. The difficulty for me has been the darkness of extinction. Yet my prior writing of 17 books brought this steadily my way to write a candid document about shattered Earth. And to the best of my ability, I endeavored to follow Gandhi's principles of ahimsa, do not harm, and the teachings on mindfulness from the Buddha. These are the guidelines and foundations for my peace and environmental activism. And I live quite simply as a planetary activist, a Zen teacher, and a recognized guru. My initial task is always to refine my own consciousness, to be a vehicle to chart an authentic path. If I didn't do this, I could not write something like Shattered Earth, Approaching Extinction. So the focus on daily mindfulness enables me to be still and clear. So steadiness, clarity, and compassion, that's what's there. It's not an ego posturing from the lunatic fringe. And I prefer the still point, uncolored by the excess of ego and desire for recognition. It propels me to serve the planet and humanity by creating bridges and pathways of mindfulness for community activism. Now, the creation of my 2008 book, this was called Failsafe, Saving the Earth from Ourselves. This was part of this process, though I didn't realize it at the time. It was written from an unusual place and was also the midpoint of 2 trilogies. And here you will see how the indigenous realm comes in very strongly. Now, many years ago, prior to the beginning of spring, after a very severe winter, I participated in a sweat lodge ceremony with respected elders from the Ojibwa, Dene, and Mohawk First Nations. We made very deeply personal commitments to serve the Earth Mother. At the end of the ceremony, we emerged into the pristine beauty of a late snowfall from a clear star-studded sky. There's about 4 inches of snow. As we walked barefoot to where we were camping, I turned round and I saw our footprints in the snow. It seemed as though these were the first footprints on a new earth. And I gestured to the elders, to my companions, to stop and look. They silently shared the same insight that I had, with soft smiles. And in that instant, the stillness and silence renewed our commitments to serve Mother Earth with all our hearts and mind. And that was the moment when I became integrated with the wisdom of the elders. So with that particular book and that particular event, I was really imprinted into the wisdom of the elders. So what I have to say about these 18 books, all these books were writing me, although I was not aware of it. So each book had issued forth from the experience of profound silence. And it took me a long time to wake up to this. Now, the first book in one trilogy was called Anthropology at the Edge. That was published in 1997, followed by The Essential Spiral in 2002 and Failsafe in 2008. These books were university textbooks and the basis for 2 television courses, which are still being played after all those years. And what these books indicated was the necessity of changing the mindset of humanity in order to combat climate change. I knew that if we continue to turn our beautiful rivers into sewers, there is no place on Mother Earth to sustain our present civilization. Now, the following books, Earth, My Body, Earth, My Body, Water, My Blood. I'm really proud of this one. This was co-authored with students in my university class on ecology and culture. And it was based on the 5 great elements: earth, water, air, fire, and space, inherent in all aspects of life. The idea was that we are our environment, whether we live in a rural or an industrial area. Now, we come on to something else. A book I wrote that followed that is called New Planet, New World. I bring the 18th century to collide with the 21st century. So time, culture, space, and consciousness, I fuse it across centuries in order to create this book. And it's a counterpoint to the demise of modern civilization. So what my books do, it reinforces the attempt to create an authentic tapestry about the state of our world. That is what everyone wants to do, if only they just stop and think about it. It's a natural response to all the inauthenticity. Look, I can't say that word, authenticity, that surrounds us daily. So the present time needs a still point that permits us to create bridges and pathways of harmony. And we're not doing that. We just have to look at what's going on in North America at this point. There are no bridges and pathways of harmony, although there are many people who would like to do that. So what I would say about my writing, it's a vigorous message about personal transformation in order to become stewards of the earth and society. So the global movement towards mindful engagement in all spheres of life is meeting with gradual success. Although there's a great many riots in America, there are also many, many white and black and brown, every color of the globe, they're all trying to protest the terrible manner in which Black people have been suffering from. And from that, I think we have to go back into America's history. When the Civil War finished 200 years ago, we have to realize it never ended. It morphed into a terrible racism. So from the Civil War, we're seeing it playing out again now. And I just hope that there are enough people, leaders, who can bring all their other friends, people, up to a point of realize, okay, this has gone on long enough since the inception of our nation. Therefore, we must change. And I do think there are a lot of very, very fine people who can lead. And what is missing is a Gandhi, a Martin Luther King. And I hope someone can emerge of that kind of stature in order to bring people together in a non-violent way. That's just my thought. I've been quite distressed watching the TV and what's happening in America at the moment. And I don't know if I'm getting off topic here.
No, you are right. You are right. And I made a point to myself to read in the next several months a lot about indigenous people, the history of indigenous people all over the world, starting with Australia, then North America, as a sign of respect for what they brought forward, and they still have a lot to teach us, and we don't want to understand that. And going back to your point of no respect for Black people, and we are all slaves, to be honest with you. Either it's a financial system or other type of slavery. We are all slaves, so that's why we have to be united. I don't want to get into politics, and I know it's a very sensitive point these days, but we have to transcend this situation, increase our own vibration, our awareness, and make this change ripple through the society. And for those here is the Shattered Earth and the fail-safe also, and our world is burning. These are important. I suggest everyone to buy and read. I know that a sore point in your thinking is what we leave behind us for the future generations. So how do you think we can teach the children, make them aware? I mean, they understand what nature is. Most of them that don't have a connection with nature the same way the indigenous people have. And if we go on think of the idea of increased awareness in order to understand ourselves and understand nature, how can we open them up to the spiritual side of themselves?
That's a very good point. And what I do I start in my neighborhood. There are lots of wonderful children, and they help me in the garden. And sometimes it's quite hilarious. I was really doing a lot of work on a particular plant and watering it, giving it all kinds of good earth and so on. Then they started to laugh hilariously because this was not a tomato plant. It was a giant weed. So with the children, we have a lot of laughter, and they work with me in the garden planting. And usually I'll tell them stories about indigenous people to see if it catches on as an idea. And it's really nice having these young people helping me. So sometimes I have to go back over it myself, but they rather than give them too much to think about, saying this is the way in which corn was grown by indigenous people, and then we'll talk about how important maize and corn is to indigenous people. But in my own neighborhood, I get in slowly. I also give talks to schools, which always starts simply. The whole idea that indigenous people, they look forward 7 generations. And that is a wonderful starter, because people don't think too much beyond grandpa, but 7 generations. And that means if there's going to be thinking of 7 generations into the future, that means taking really good care. This is why in Canada, I think our forests should have direction from the elders about keeping things alive and present for 7 generations. It'd be a good perceptive for every leader around the planet to take on. And here I think of the Prime Minister of New Zealand and compare her to the President of the United States.
What all the leaders you mentioned have in common is that they were all killed, assassinated because of their views and because they wanted to change the world. And I think this is the fear in anyone who will try to step forward, being a true leader, understanding all the aspects of society, that he might have a short-lived leadership because of various interests which will take him out or her out.
Yes.
So we have to think about that aspect as well. So the more of us who lead the movement, I think less worried about physical elimination or being distracted from the main goal.
Yeah, well, there really is a thirst for Dharma talks on what we've just been talking about. Some of my students from the university and also students from the Pine Gate meditation community, they've asked if I would send out once a week a Dharma talk, and I'm amazed at the response. This stuff was done some time ago because I retired both from Carleton University and also from Pine Gate. I had 3 years of surgery to go through, so I couldn't do both. So I sort of resigned. But what I find is right now I'm coming back with all of these Dharma talks. I had a friend who was a very good cameraman, and he would take the Dharma talk onto YouTube. So I now have a YouTube channel, Pine Gate Sangha, and I thought this was kind of lost in history, but this is being revived, and I'm glad that I was talked into doing this because it seems to have a good impact on young people. And I think it's really important to hold up our children, encourage them, take time. I often say to younger people, 15 through to 25, that my generation has not left them with a good planet. It's up to them. And what they have from people like me is all kinds of passages that they can consider, and that they have my support. I had such a how can I put it, the climate strikes down at Parliament Hill in Ottawa, and seeing all these thousands of young people putting their hearts into it, knowing that they may not have too much of a future, and they're brave, and what was exciting for me, I bumped into a lot of my university students who are now sort of adults, and they've got their kids with them, and they talk to me about the ecology stuff they would get from me when I was talking about anthropology. So I take time with young people. I suppose as I'm getting closer and closer to 80, it's time I talked.
You have a long time to go, so don't worry. What is the status of the Friends for Peace?
Well, the Friends of Peace, what I did, because I was faced with three years of surgeries, so I had to let that go. But I filled it, I infused it into something else. This was the autumn Peace Festival that lasts for about 2 weeks, and I really push Friends for Peace into that, so that different people would have a very good opportunity to stand for peace, planetary care, and social justice. And it's a very, very wide. It's much wider than Friends for Peace used to be. So that was a good move.
Good. What is your next project? The 19th book or something else?
Well, there is a 19th book that I'm working on. And this is a set of short stories. It's about past, present, and future. And I'm finding writing short stories is far more demanding than a novel. So I have to go up a notch or two with that. So I'm enjoying that. It's a challenge.
Dr. Prattis, it's been a pleasure to have you as a guest. Thank you very much for your time, and namaste.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
And for all my viewers, please subscribe to my channel, click the bell button so you get reminded. And until next time, love and gratitude.